Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the TFC audio project. On this episode of Shop Talk, Mike and I talk about flow state. We define what flow is, how we came to discover it personally, and we chat about the potential to harness flow in physical and mental activities to boost performance. We chat about using flow to enhance creativity, ways to hack and trigger flow state, and also the insane benefits of training your ability to tap into flow in order to boost productivity. Definitely an interesting topic for us, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by the TFC Foot Nerd program. It's an online program we kicked off at the start of 2019 to expand our global community of humans who are spreading the message of health, starting at the feet. The online curriculum is constantly evolving, and it acts as a repository of content and resources that gives you up-to-date knowledge about the body and how to teach it to others. The program is also an effort to expand our instructor team and be able to meet the demand for seminars and workshops around the world in the coming years. For more info on the program, visit thefootcollective.com and click on the Foot Nerd Program tab, and you'll be able to download more info about that. This episode is also brought to you by the Roasters Pack. Our team at TFC HQ in Ottawa are big fans of coffee, and this Canadian company provides a unique subscription service that delivers you 3 great coffees to your door each month and also gives you the story behind each of the craft roasters that they come from. Check out theroasterspack.com and use the code FOOT at checkout for $7 off your first month of any subscription, which start at $27 a month, all in, including shipping and taxes. So it's a pretty solid deal. Last but not least, this episode is also sponsored by our travel partner, Nanook Protective Hard Cases, which we use to transport gear for our seminars and workshops. They make super high quality cases in Canada that keep your electronics safe during travel, and you can check out what they offer at nanook.com, Nanuk.com. That's it for sponsors, so let's dig into this episode. Hope you enjoy.
It's the TFC audio project.
It's a collective effort. Help people understand their bodies. Starting at the feet are the gateway for people to see that there's an issue. You know, a foot conversation is always a whole body conversation. Hey folks, Nick and Mike here, back for another episode of Shop Talk. Today's topic is one that's interested us both very much in the past few years, and one that we're continuing to kind of learn and especially trying to apply and hack it, and that is flow state. It's a topic, you know, that I think at the start can seem abstract. I think everyone's experienced flow state, whether they realize it or not. So today we want to talk about, you know, defining flow state, how it can be applied, the elements required to enter flow state, and really just introduce it, because this is a topic that will probably have several episodes on in the future. But the big thing today is just introduce flow state and talk about why you should care about flow state, how it can add value to your life, because it's not, you know, a lot of people think that flow state might be reserved for people that are doing extreme sports or athletics, but it also applies to day-to-day life and can actually give you a lot more enjoyment and fulfillment out of just day-to-day life by trying to find ways to enter flow state. So let's start with just talking about what is flow. What is flow state? Yes. Define it.
Yeah, so flow is basically defined as an optimal state of consciousness. So it is a state of consciousness that we can get a hold of, and it's where we feel and perform our best. So oftentimes people will talk about being in the zone. Mm-hmm. So that's something that really they're talking about being in this flow state.
I think everyone said that too, being in the zone or being like losing track of time. This is once you start to kind of play with the words of how to describe this very kind of abstract notion, people are like, "Oh, I've done that. I've been there before."
Yeah, it's like when we're totally focused on the task at hand, forgetting everything else, full attention and absorption in whatever we're doing, time dilation. We'll talk about the list of components, but these are things that, time either flies by really quickly or goes slowly. We're in that kind of really fully focused state. We're not thinking about other things. We're not thinking about ourselves. Mm-hmm. The ego vanishes and all these things. And it's a feeling, and it's also accompanied by a certain state of physiology. And we'll talk about the physiology of it later in terms of the neurochemistry and parts of the brain that are kind of shutting off and parts that are lighting up. So it's actually, you can measure it these days neurochemically and via fMRI and imaging and stuff like that. So it's a real state that people can get into, and it's just a matter of there's certain triggers that can actually help promote us, and there's certain ways that people talk about hacking flow. So one of the things that that people can do is learn how to hack it and get into that state, so they can be there more often. And we'll talk about why that's important. But
flows it really is this kind of like innate superpower that's something most of us, like we talked about, most of us have experienced for brief times, and seems to be this very flighting thing where it's like, oh, I don't know what it was, but I was in this state of mind where I was hyper focused on something. And people actually find, like, before I started reading about it, I found it very difficult to describe and to kind of articulate what flow state actually is. You know what it is, but you don't know with words, right? It's like this very inanimate thing that is based on experiential feeling, but very hard to describe. It wasn't until I started reading Csikszentmihalyi that it was like, okay, this is actually, the science is insane on flow now. Because, and I think the biggest reason for that is because it's such a powerful weapon, right? Whether that's for productivity or for especially extreme sports. I think, what's his name? Stephen Kotler talked about that was like a big aha moment for him as a journalist, was following these extreme athletes and seeing what they were doing and the speed and rate of improvement and the things they were doing now that they were never able to do before.
Yeah, I used to get that when I was skateboarding as a kid. So there's the days you would just actually, it's like in one day, if you were in that state, you could make these huge breakthroughs and progresses, and you could like learn new tricks and then also learn tricks on top of that. And like, it's like, oh my God, I just made like a month's progress in that one day because I was just feeling it. And it's like, why was I feeling it that day? I don't know. And that's the thing. It's like a lot of times you don't know why you're in that state, but you're in it, and then it's like you want to take advantage of it, and then it's not always there.
And you're constantly trying to find ways to get back into that state, right? Like if you could make a month's worth of progress in one skate session, you're like, shit, what did I do to get to there? And I think, so let's go through some components of flow, because I think the science has done a really good job at breaking down the elements required. Essentially, you can learn how to hack flow state if you really want to research it and learn about it, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's reading. Csikszentmihalyi has his book literally called Flow. He's got one on creativity too, which basically just applies flow state to creativity. It's called The Psychology and Discovery of Invention. I'm staring at it right now. It's the only reason I remember the name. But I think the components of flow. So the first one is intense and focused concentration in the present moment. And I think focus, if there's one word that encapsulates flow, I think it's focus, right? You have to be non-distracted and hyper-focused on something so much, and I think that focus doesn't come from an extrinsic source, right? You can't just do something and zone in on something because you're going to get paid to do it. Or you have to intrinsically want to do something. You have to have a passion or a desire or this like deeper motivation to do something beyond just some external reward. And so the first one is, intense and focused concentration in the present moment. And I think one reason that people find it so hard to get into flow is because being in the present moment alone is a hard state for people to get into. There's so many distractions. There's like Instagram alone is a massive barrier to flow. Technology in general, the way society is engineered with so much activity, and the average workplace, you have noise, you have other people talking, you have this constant grabbing of your attention from technology, from these companies that are literally getting paid to steal your consciousness, steal your attention, and captivate your attention. So I think that's a big one that people find it hard to get into flow, and it's a big barrier.
If we're talking about the components of flow, I mean, that's when if you almost look back and like, when was I in flow? Okay, I was fully focused in that moment. Yeah. We'll talk later about like some triggers that you can actually hack to get there. But that flow follows focus is key, because, and that's what Kotler said, is just it really follows the period of time where you're focused, and that's, if you can't get into that initial focus, you're not going to be able to reach that state of flow.
That's a big barrier. The next one is merging of action and awareness, and I feel like that's fairly similar to the first kind of component, right? Like what you're doing and where your mind is they blend together. So it's very similar in that it's a state of being present in that moment, paying complete attention, giving undivided focus to the task that you're doing, so that your awareness and your action or whatever you're doing are one and the same.
It's the here and now. So have full attention to the here and now, and not just, like you say, it's the presence. So anything in the future is really not. It can't be present. So and thinking about and in the past. So that's really. Again, we'll talk about the brain regions involved in that, but when you're thinking about the future, that's associated with even things like anxiety coming into play. Anxiety exists in the future. It's like fear of the future. So that, again, is something that is not in the equation at all when you're in the deep here and now.
And I think that this next component touches on that even more. It's loss of reflective self-consciousness. So you're not thinking of what other people might think of you. You're not thinking of what happened yesterday and ruminating on negativity or trying to solve a problem, a yesterday problem or a future problem. You're literally completely immersed. So loss of reflective self-consciousness is another component. The next one is sense of control over the activity, right? You have to have this sense that you have the power to control what is being done. You know how to do the activity. You feel competent and capable of doing the activity at whatever level you're doing at.
It's almost like the let's do this thing. Like, it's like, I get that when I'm on the Slack line too. It's like, okay, let's do this now. Yeah. And it's like, I can do it. But it's like, put your focus into it. Like, cut the shit out. Get into this.
Yeah. You can't be on Instagram when you're on a Slack line. You can't do anything, actually. You can't look at planes above you. You can't think of the people looking at you. You're literally just, okay, I'm going to put all of my mental and physical power into not falling off of this piece of nylon. And I think that's that sense of control. I think, so sense of control, for example, a person that tries slackline for the first time, it can be very hard for them to get in flow state because they're literally just trying to learn, how does this thing even work? My body doesn't know how to do this. People that are looking at me might think I look silly. I feel
they don't know that they can actually do it.
Yeah.
So there's no sense of that they're in control.
Yeah, no sense of control.
No sense of control, but it's almost like you need to know that if I'm in it and if I'm performing the way I know I can perform, that I'm in control of this. And it doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it, right? But it means that, like, I know that if I'm in it, I can do it. So.
Yeah, exactly. The next one is distortion of temporal experience, so time dilation. This is a very strange one that I'm sure you've experienced. And when you get so deeply focused into something, time, the metric of time, how much time you're spending doing that, how much time is passing by, is a metric that doesn't exist. And I'm sure you've done something where you're doing it for like 2 hours and you're like, wow, it feels like 10 minutes just passed by. And it's almost this very strange thing where the element of time in terms of your conscious awareness simply is not a factor. Like your brain is essentially trimming away things that aren't relevant based on just allowing you to put all of your resources into the task at hand. And so time dilation is another one of those elements. Like, when have you experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, the surfing's an interesting one. Like, you don't know how long it's been.
Yeah.
You're just out there, and again, surfing's interesting because it's almost like there's different components to the flow. It's like this like macro flow state, being out there and watching the waves, but then it's also this like micro flow state where you're in it right when the wave comes. But the whole thing equates to, like, I don't know how, I remember in Costa Rica, it was like, we went in,
we would never finish at the same time. We're like, okay, let's go for like X amount of hours. And then one person would always go in early and be waiting for, but I think that we just need waterproof watches. That's the solution.
But the beauty is kind of not having watches.
You're
like
right,
that,
actually.
like,
yeah.
It's just like, I don't know how long it's been. I just think it's been around this time, and you go and you're like 2 hours off. You're like, okay, that's cool.
Beautiful part doesn't really matter. It's like, what's the worst thing that happens? You literally sit on a beautiful beach, wait for half an hour for the other person to finish. We almost have to go by like sun position.
Yeah.
It's like when the sun gets to here, we need to go in. And then the last one is, it talks about the experience of the activity is intrinsically rewarding, or what some people will call an autotelic experience. So autotelic comes from, is like a Greek-based word. Auto is self and telos is goal. So what that means is that the activity is an end in and of itself, right? You're not doing the activity. The activity is not done for the expectation of future benefit, but it's simply because doing it itself is the reward, right? Like when a rock climber climbs a massive wall, they're not typically doing it because they feel they're going to get recognition or they're going to get financial benefit. Climbing the actual face is the reward in and of itself. It is the experience itself is rewarding. And so I think that's a very big one, and that's a big element that needs to be there.
And you can even apply that to things like your work too. A lot of people with this autotelic personality will actually look at like even problems they have to solve in their work, and they'll get like excited about solving the problems, and they're actually like interested in solving things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could even say, like, even in a workplace, you can find these states of flow, and you can do these things for the intrinsic reward of solving problems or making breakthroughs or whatever it is, or being completely immersed in the creative work that you're doing to kind of make breakthroughs. So it doesn't just apply to action adventure sports and physical feats and all of that. It also applies to work. But I think the action adventure sports, maybe we can kind of touch on that a little bit more, because that's very, like, it's a clear example of where flow takes place. And I think it's one of the easier ways, using your physical body to actually tap into these states. It's like it's easy to know because you'll actually feel it. And just a few examples is, like, we talked about the surfing, but like, I don't know if anyone's seen parkour these days. So parkour athletes,
insane.
and parkour in and of itself is kind of a new thing, a new phenomenon. I mean, it's essentially,
what's the word based on? Parcours?
Parcours, yeah. It's like
what does that mean? It's like a French word for.
I don't know. I think it used to be done in like the natural environment.
We need our own version of Jamie. Okay,
Yeah,
I'll act like Jamie.
But yeah, it used to be done in the natural environment. Now it's done typically, well, it can be done anywhere. I like to think that I'm doing kind of natural parkour when I go out on some of these more difficult hikes and stuff like that. But you see some of these athletes doing, like, jumps across buildings, jumps down like 2-story buildings, landing and rolling it out, backflips off buildings, like crazy stuff. And you're like, wait a minute, I don't even think humans couldn't ever do that. It's like no human's ever done that. So you're like, where did this come from? And the same goes for, like, one example is just Dom Tomato, one of those Red Bull parkour athletes. And I watch this channel sometimes. I'm like, wait a minute, like, he's just making these continual breakthroughs, and it's like he's just upping the level on what humans can do from a physical standpoint. On a regular basis. So it's almost like he needs to be in this flow state in order to jump across buildings, off buildings, walk like on skyscrapers, all these things. You need to be in that state of flow. You just have to, and they'll tell you that.
Otherwise, fear is a massive inhibitor, right?
For sure.
Like, you have to have a sense of competence, and it's one of those things. It's hilarious. You post something. You got to post cool shit on Instagram once in a while, right? Like, you're competing with competing with sports cars and girls' butts and really entertaining stuff. So if you're trying to convey a health message, you got to post some cool stuff. And I think one of the things that I like to post is showing people what the upper echelon of human potential is, right? Like Dom Tomato or Nate Weston or Movement DJs. Like, what these guys do is insane. And I think people will say, oh, that's so reckless or that's dangerous. Or I remember posting a video of you walking on a railing next to flowing water, and people are like, that's so reckless. You shouldn't be doing that. It's like, that is completely within your realm of competence. That's not extreme for
it's
you.
In that sense of control that we talked about. Because the person doing it knows that they can do it.
Yeah.
The person who's watching on Instagram thinks that that's crazy because they know that they could never do it.
Exactly.
So they're just kind of projecting that, like, that's reckless, but it's like, well, it's reckless for you, because if you tried that right now, you might die. But the person doing it is like, this is right in my capabilities, and I know if I'm really, really focused right now, I can kill this right now. So that's the key with all of it. So you're always kind of walking that fine line, knowing, like, I know I can do this, but I need to be in the zone to do this. And that's where that progress made. So progress is made. In the action adventure sports, like, crazy progress is made. And I think that the flow amount allows for massive breakthroughs in performance. So it allows for these, like, micro breakthroughs. But when compounded over time, it equates to this, like, crazy exponential progress. So you see, we were talking about the skateboarding example too, like Tony Hawk in the first 900. And now there's kids doing 1080s in the X Games. So it's like, well, what's going on here? And that happens in so many different action adventure sports.
Even the 4-minute mile, right? Like Bannister, when he broke the 4-minute mile and did 3:59, it was hilarious too, because doctors were literally saying humans cannot run below 4 minutes for a mile. They will literally die if they do that. And then Bannister did it, and then within, like, months after that, within a very short period of time, high school kids were breaking the 4-minute mile, because it was like this mental barrier had been broken, and now people were like, oh shit, that can be done? Perfect. Let's see what else can be done. So back to parkour. The word parkour comes from parcours du combattant, which is literally, it means obstacle course. The classic obstacle course method of military training proposed by George Hebert. So it literally, they're turning the modern concrete jungle that this artificial concrete world that we've created, which is like cities, and they're turning them into obstacle courses. And some of the stuff that these guys are doing is so high level and so insane in terms of the body awareness, the coordination, the balance. It just, like, it blows my mind to watch these guys. It really is very inspiring, but it's also like, you never see the iterations. That's the thing. People never see the bales. People never see all the small steps that these guys went through in order to get to that stage, right? You're seeing the result. You're not seeing the process. And I think that's where people are like, oh, I can never do that. It's like, well, that guy didn't start by just doing that.
No.
That guy started by like jumping a foot and then jumping 2
flow got
feet.
him in that too. So flow was present at every stage, and flow is what allowed him to get to that point. And we're seeing that end stage. But I think that flow has been, like I said, it's been really responsible for a lot of these things. And you didn't see humans doing like triple, quadruple backflips off cliffs like in the 1200s or anything. Like I don't know, maybe they did. But
Probably not,
a lot of these sports is like, holy crap, humans can actually do that. And that's one side note. That's like the paradox of today's day and age. It's like we're living in a time where we're losing touch with our physical bodies and what they can do for the most part. But then there's this small subset of people on the opposite extreme who are actually pushing what our bodies can do to absolute extremes and going way past what we even thought we could do. So it's like most people are kind of losing touch with the bodies. Select few are really pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And so like one of the main guys in terms of flow, we mentioned him before, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which the way his name is spelt it would not lead you on to pronouncing it like that. But literally most of the alphabet letters are in his last name. It's very crazy. But why is this relevant? Like the average person listening to this would be like, okay, you got these extreme athletes doing crazy stuff. Why should I give a shit about flow? And I think, one thing that Csikszentmihalyi went into is flow is fundamental to well-being and overall life satisfaction. And he did a very powerful study, and showed that people in the world who scored highest in overall life satisfaction and well-being were also the people with the most flow in their lives. And it wasn't flow like jumping off cliffs, but it was entering these states of complete absorption in the present moment and hyper-focus on the task that you're doing. And literally it can be anything. It can be writing an essay. It could be writing a blog. It could be going for a run. We'll go through ways that you and I have discovered to get into flow. It could be a project you're working on at work, right? Instead of looking at it and being like, oh God, I got to put together a spreadsheet. It's like, I'm going to get into the zone and I'm going to crush this freaking spreadsheet. I'm going to do it as best as I can, and I'm going to be as focused as I can during this period of time. So it is relevant to everyone. And in fact, connecting with it and understanding it can actually give you a much better sense of purpose and happiness in your life. So that's why I just wanted to mention that, because I think it's easy to get off on the path of like people doing crazy stuff. But for the average everyday person, this is very relevant. It's
universal is one of the things he found. So it's fundamental, but also like that universality of it. And I remember reading his book, and he would go around and he would find factory workers who would have some of these same characteristics. And even there was factory workers who had this deep satisfaction. He's, what is it about that? And he would find that they'd actually get into this flow state even at work, and doing like repetitive tasks. They kind of get right into this zone. More than others, and they would also be the people who had much higher life satisfaction and overall well-being than other counterpart workers. So, like you say, it shows up in a lot of different places. It's universal, but it's also kind of this fundamental component.
Well, okay, so you texted me probably, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, and you're like, let's do a podcast on, first we talked about doing one on creativity, and then it switched over to flow, which will encapsulate creativity. But the minute I started kind of putting down notes and writing stuff down, I realized that one of the ways I get into flow every day is doing dishes.
Really?
I literally will look at like a sink full of dishes, and I'll be like, I'm just going to zone in and do these dishes as best I can. I think it's just part of OCD tendencies of like just trying to do things to not to the extreme level, but doing them as best I can. And I just realized, for like 15 minutes a day, I get into flow by just doing dishes. And so it just goes to show that it's all perspective of how you frame a task that you're doing. I have to do these dishes. I may as well do them well, so there's not shit everywhere all over them when I put them in the cupboard. Why wouldn't I just focus all of my energy for that short period of time to get it done as efficiently and as well as possible? And
then you probably look at them after and you're like, holy shit. And it's like time went by super quickly probably, and you're like, I just crushed that. And all the right there. And that kind of relates to that. Like there was a McKinsey study on flow, and it said top executives in flow are 5 times more productive than those without flow. So it shows up in the workplace too with dishes. It can show up anywhere, but it's like when you're in that state, it's like your productivity goes through the roof and you don't even know it, and then it's like boom, all of this just happened.
Let's put 5 times productivity into context. So if you're an executive, one executive gets into flow when they go into work, they immediately get into flow and stay in flow. And obviously it's fairly tricky. You have to be very, very skilled and basically engineer a workplace that is free of distractions. But one executive goes in, and when they're in the workplace, they're in flow. The other one is not. That executive that's in flow can work a Monday and take the rest of the week off and get just as much done as the other person that works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So in one day, they can accomplish 5 days worth of work if they're in flow. That is very powerful, right? So finding flow, even to a small extent in the workplace, can allow you to accomplish the same amount of work, probably to a greater level of competency or better quality in less time. And it just leaves you more time to do other things.
That's the thing. And it's like, we're not expecting you to be in complete flow state for a full day, but engineering little bits and pieces of it increases that productivity in like spurts throughout the week, which would make your whole week more productive. Okay, so I want to talk about the physiology and just get more into the science behind it a little bit.
Yep.
So one thing is that I've heard a lot from Kotler talking about, and some of the flow research, is this transient hypofrontality concept.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of it's the brain's division of resources and energy. So it's where the brain kind of devotes its energy to. So hypo means like less. Frontality is the frontal cortex, specifically the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
So the prefrontal cortex is really kind of that overall. It's like it contains the ego, that sense of self, that like really, watching everything, thinking about the future, long-term planning, thinking about the past, thinking.
Time sense is also in prefrontal cortex.
All of these things that we talked about that aren't equated to flow, that prefrontal cortex is really kind of the master of that. So transient means like we're only in it for a small period of
Temporary.
time. So it's temporary. So it's a temporary deactivation of the prefrontal cortex, and it doesn't fully deactivate, but you're actually shunting all of this blood flow and resources to other areas of the brain. These areas are more responsible for focus on the here and now, attention, body sense, all of these things that you're not necessarily thinking about when you're in this like highly prefrontal state. Yeah. So like the feel of things, but really it's this deep attention, and the attention might be to different things. If you're doing an action adventure sport, it's that body feel, it's the vision, it's hearing, it's all of these senses that we need to really hone in on. Well, and that's all brain activity, right?
And the prefrontal cortex is also the home where your inner critic lives, right? Mm-hmm. Like your sense, what causes anxiety is you criticizing yourself or you caring about what other people think about you. That area gets shut down too. And one thing that Kotler talks about, this whole 10% brain use myth, right? Like we only use 10% of our brains. So I think when you talk about flow, people are like, well, you're just using more than 10%. When the reality is, like you said, with transient hypofrontality, you're actually using less. But you're using a different area, and you're bringing resources away from the area that thinks of things in the future and in the past and creates anxiety and creates criticism. And you're putting it into this kind of channel that you can focus all of your attention to your senses, to the task at hand. And so you're not using more of your brain, you're using less, but you're using more of one specific area and less of the general stuff that's really not relevant. So you're basically just
getting out of your own way.
Shut down non-essential functions and focus 100% on the task at hand, which is why you can achieve so much in so little time, is just because all of your resources are there to that one spot. Mm-hmm. So that's powerful.
Kind of that, talking about it from a brain perspective, from a neurochemical perspective, and again, that's highly associated with what's going on in the brain. There's this massive dump of neurochemicals. The main ones that are talked about are norepinephrine, dopamine, anandamide, endorphins, and serotonin. And the flow signature is that all 5 of these are released to different extents. But
by the way, those are the most powerful neurochemicals that your body produces. Mm-hmm. Like even anandamide. Anandamide interacts with THC receptors, and Ananda in Sanskrit, which is like this old Indian kind of language, actually means joy, bliss, or happiness. Mm-hmm. So this dump of these 5 neurochemicals is like, this is the reason people get addicted. This is the reason Laird Hamilton gets depressed when there's no waves. This is the reason people seek flow, and it's almost like this this constant attempt to seek these flow experiences is because you are seeking the natural high that your body gives you when you're in flow.
You're seeking the physiology associated with it, and it all comes down to these neurochemicals. So it's that the feel good from the actual chemicals in your brain and body. But that's also what allows for these other things. So the same chemical dump that you get also allows your brain to perform better when this dump is present. And that's where the neurochemical dump allows for better things like learning. So making new connections in your brain and taking things from that short-term memory to that long-term memory, really associated with having this kind of flood of good neurochemistry and being in this state of attention and focus, so you can actually use all these conditions that flow state gives you to create these associations. Another thing is that creativity. So the creativity is really associated with having these chemicals present and making these connections between different things. So lateral thinking is one of the biggest things in creativity. So taking things you know already and then associating them with other things that you're thinking about too. So it's like making these weird connections that you wouldn't have normally thought about. And that's all kind of, and you'll see that when you're in different states, you're like you have these aha moments, right? And I think a big part is just, first of all, the state you're in, and underneath the state is all this neurochemistry.
Yeah, I think people misunderstand. I don't think people know what creativity is, like know how to. If you ask the average person, they know what creativity is, but they don't know how to actually define it with words, right? Like, Kotler said it well when he was like, it happens when the brain takes novel information and connects older ideas to that novel information to create something new. And it's like this state of mind that, and like you said, like we talked about before, the creativity boosts that you get by being in flow state actually trickle over beyond that transient flow state, right? So you might do something that gets you in a flow state, it boosts creativity, it boosts your ability to create these novel connections. And then like a day later, that creativity, like, it's almost like an afterglow of creativity. It lasts beyond the time that you're in flow state and can allow you to like solve problems or create, creative solutions beyond that flow state time. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, he was saying like up to 1 to 2 days. But I would say even in that like latency period after, it's like I'm not necessarily going to be creative when I'm on a slackline, but that kind of state I'm in right after is where I might be more creative in that, like, especially that hour or two afterwards.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going to really, and that's what we'll talk about at the end, is like, can we use this flow state to, choose activities that get us there and then really plan ahead so we're doing, work that we want to be doing right after it, so we can make use of this physiology that we're in.
And so Csikszentmihalyi, a lot of people call him the godfather of flow, because he really was a lot of people knew about flow, but he was really the science guy that put it on the radar as a tool, in the world of business, as a tool, as a performance booster in the world of sports. But 3 things that he said about flow was, number 1, flow is definable. So hopefully we've done a decent job at defining what flow is. Number 2, flow is measurable. So you can actually measure how much time, they have all these, whether it's an fMRI or these kind of like, I saw a video of someone had like almost like a swim cap with these receptors, with these sensors in it. And that could actually detect the patterns that showed that someone was in flow when they were doing like simple problem solving on a computer screen in an experiment. And then, like you said before, flow is universal. So the fact that it's definable and it's also measurable means we can now talk about, we can get stats on flow. So you said flow amplifies productivity in those executives. One stat that he had said was that flow amplifies creativity by 400 to 700%. Flow learning rates during flow increase by 400%, like 4x the speed of learning, right? Like if you read a book, you can either read it in 4 hours or 1 hour if you're really hyper focusing on what you're doing and really intrinsically motivated to consume that.
That's actually a good the book is a good example, because I find if I'm, for some reason, I'm on a plane and I'm reading a book, I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing else to do right now. And I can like crush a book on a plane.
Yeah.
And that book would have probably taken me like a month or two just doing little spurts of it and me like daydreaming, and it's like having to go back in a page and like, did I even cover this? So it's like, if you're in the zone, it's like you can crush things and you can like take a lot more from it. And I specifically remember the books I've read on planes a lot more than ones that I've just kind of been chipped away.
So the memory was also affected.
Oh, for sure. Because it's like you're just totally in it and like immersed in the book. So that's interesting because I didn't think about that.
Very cool. Yeah. And so I think, so let's talk about, based on the fact that flow is hackable, right? Let's talk about flow triggers, because flow does have triggers. And, I think one of the biggest ones is that flow follows focus. So this intense focus on a specific task you're doing, and it could be the dishes, it can be on a slack line or a balance beam or running, whatever it is. Let's talk about individual triggers, and then maybe after that, let's talk about the flow channel too, in terms of skill to challenge ratio.
So there's 10 that I have listed here, and I'll just list them all. We don't have to break down every one. And a lot of them are due to the fact that they demand attention and focus, like you mentioned already. So passion and purpose is one of them. So doing something that you're actually,
that you give a shit about.
You give a shit about. Risk, novelty, complexity, and unpredictability are the next 4. So that's kind of that. They're all saying the same thing. It has to be something that has some component of risk in it.
I think helps. Risk is just one of those things that when you were bouncing on that railing and there was water, like very quick flowing water beside you, you had no choice. But I think risk literally just forces you. And this will make more sense when we talk about the challenge skill ratio, because risk is only a good thing if you feel competent in what you're doing.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be, like, all 10 of these things don't necessarily need to be present, but these are things that can help. So if you want to use specifically risk, that can be one of the things that triggers your need to get into flow. The novelty is another thing. So something like new, it's like, oh, I've never been here before. I better concentrate and focus on this. This is a new situation, so it's demanding my attention and focus. Complexity, kind of the same thing. If something's complex, you're like, okay, I better focus on this because things are complex right here. Unpredictability is kind of along with those things too. It's like, if something's not predictable, you need to really hyper focus on it to really pick up these, like, pattern recognition and all of these things and really get into that zone. The next one would be deep embodiment. So just like physically getting into something, like feeling something, being embodied in something. Getting immediate feedback is another one. So something that quickly tells you if you're on the right track or the wrong track. And something as simple like say a slack line is very simple. It's like, if you're falling off, the feedback is you're falling off or you're staying on. So immediate. It's like, it's very quick and immediate and you know how you're doing based on that. Then clear goals. That's kind of one hand in hand with immediate feedback. So something that it's like, I know what the goals are. It's very clear to me what I need to be doing right now. And I know if I'm not reaching those goals or if I am. Creativity and pattern recognition. And then the final one I have listed is the challenge skills ratio is another flow trigger. So maybe we can kind of dive off to that challenge skills ratio. And what it means is that one of the triggers to flow can be choosing an activity that is not too hard or not too easy. So the challenge versus skills ratio is critical. We've mentioned that a few times, but there's something called this flow channel. And this flow channel is basically when you have this perfect balance of a challenge that's going to make you get into flow, and it's going to challenge your skills, and it's going to demand the best out of you. But also, if it's too hard, it's going to create failure over and over and over. It's going to create anxiety, and then it's too much. So it has to be kind of below that, but it can't be too easy, because if it's too easy, it's going to create boredom, and it's not going to demand the best out of you too. So you'll just be like going through the motions and I can do it. And knowing that, like, I can do I think there's that sense of like, I know if I'm in my perfect state, I can do this. Mm-hmm. Right? Because if there's something too easy, it's like, I know I can do this if I'm just like with my eyes closed. If it's with your eyes closed, then it's too easy, right?
Yeah, and I think a couple things with the flow channel. So if it's too easy, it's boring. If it's too hard, it's frustrating because there's constant failure, there's anxiety. And the flow channel, that optimal channel is a place where it's slightly beyond your current potential, right? When you look at something, you're like, that's going to be challenging, I know if I'm at my best state, I have the potential to maybe achieve that. Like, if I push myself, everything's right, I can do that. But right now, that's really difficult, and I maybe can't do that right now, but I see the fact that I can potentially achieve that. And I think another thing about the flow channel is it's dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Because what challenged you just beyond your capability today, next week might be easy. So you need this way of constantly scaling, having clear goals, has to challenge you beyond your current capability. And if you're getting more capable, if you're improving as time goes on, this is going to change. And so you need to have access to these multiple levels, whether that's a difficulty of a hike. I think that's one of the beautiful things about bouldering that I've discovered recently is like, okay, once you realize what these friggin' colors actually mean in terms of difficulty levels, which took me way longer than it should have to realize. Once you realize that, you're like, okay, I'm going to start with this. That was really hard, but that was really hard last week, and now this is actually like easy. It's not as enjoyable because it's easy. I'm going to go on to the next level.
It's almost where you pick up where you left off to some extent. Because once you can do like the easiest level of them, it's like almost you don't even want to go there right away. You'll go like you might do a little bit of warming up and stuff, but then you'll go to like, I know I left off there. Then you push it, and then it's like you say, it's once you make the breakthrough, then it's like, oh shit, that's next in sight. So
once you realize what those colors look like, also you realize how insane some people are.
Yeah,
where you're like, oh my god, I'm struggling with this color. This is 4 colors up in terms of the difficulty level, and that person is just strolling through that. You're like, what the hell? Yeah, and I think so. This flow channel, this concept of the flow channel, I think one of the biggest reasons that, we've really locked down on this whole concept of balance beams, right? Is, I think to the average person, they're like, what's the big deal about balancing on a piece of metal? And I think one thing is that, number one, the effects you get by improving your hip stability are very beneficial, right? A lot of people have poor hip stability because they sit all day. Their feet can't really act like sensors because we deprive them of their ability to do that with shoes that have cushioning or take us away from the ground. So getting better at balancing on a round piece of metal does a lot of good things
on non-flat ground.
Ground. So with that said, something that's really good for people, how do you engage people to want to not only do this task or do this challenge, but actually want to do it repeatedly, right? Want to constantly improve. And I think one thing that I look at the beams is it makes flow attainable to the average person, right? It has extremely immediate feedback. If you fall off the beam, you're failing. So it gives you immediate feedback as to whether you're improving or not. It has clear goals. And this is where this whole beam training system that we give to the people that buy a balance beam from us comes into play. It's like, okay, this is the easiest level. These are the constraints, balancing on one leg for 1 minute, for 60 seconds without looking down at your feet. That's level 1. Very clear goals, very clear immediate feedback. And when you can do it, you then need to always be in that flow channel, right? Like after a couple days of, a couple sessions of working on it, you're like, okay, well, balancing on one leg is child's play now. This is way too easy. Giving people always another level up in difficulty, so that there's always a challenge, so that they always have access to that flow channel. There is an element of risk, right? You don't want to fall off, but it's also not a high cost risk where you're falling off and you're going to break your leg. You're literally touching the ground 2 inches away. And I think it's very interesting because when you lift a beam up off the ground, even 2 feet, you increase the risk, and it is way harder, even though it's the same balance beam that was an inch off the ground. It's crazy.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, that risk is a real driver. Although you want to keep away from risks it's up to you. Like,
risk is subjective.
Risk is subjective, but you see the slackliner. Like, you've watched that free solo slackliner, dude.
Yeah,
and it's basically like slackliners will take it from like 2 feet off, 2 feet off the ground, and then they just like, what makes it harder? The same slackline can be made so much harder just by raising it up 2 feet, raising it up 2 feet, raising it across raise it across a small cliff, so it's like, okay, same slackline, risk higher, flow. So
exactly
like you said.
So I think, and we talked about those flow triggers that you talked about are individual flow triggers, and we won't get into it a huge amount, but there's also group flow triggers, because I think, and this isn't something that I really saw a whole lot about, although Collar does talk about it, being like one single extreme athlete will get you can make different improvements, like significant levels up in level of improvement when you have a group of people doing something together, right? Like when I work on a slackliner, I work on a beam, it's very different from when we go out and do a session because I feed off of what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a prime example of the slackline was at your uncle's cottage. Okay, we're walking back and forth. We're like, okay, let's see how many reps we can do of walking back and forth over the slackline. And someone goes and they screw up a bunch, and then one person goes and they get 2 or 3 lengths down, and then the next person gets 2 or 3, and then one person goes up and gets like 18 back and forth lengths.
Yeah.
And you're like, what the hell? And then you go up and you get 18, and on the 19th you mess up.
Yeah.
And it's all mental, right? I didn't know I could walk back and forth 18 times until someone else showed me that they can do it. And then I was like, oh, shit, that's possible. Okay, I'm going to do it. And then the mental barrier is then getting to that 19th rep. So this group energy that you get by being in a similar skill level to other people, finding your flow channel, which might be different, right? I might be at a different level than you, but when I see you pushing yourself to a level that's slightly beyond what I have seen you do before, I'm like, okay, I might not be able to do that, but I'm going to push myself beyond where I think I'm at right now because I just saw someone else do it. So
even just seeing, it's like multiple factors. Like you're seeing, first of all, that's possible, but second of all, you're just witnessing somebody else in flow, and that alone is like you
very
can
inspiring.
tell when somebody's like, you're like, oh shit, he did that because of the state he was in. And one more thing on that slackline is like, I don't know about you, but when I was going back and forth, the limiting factor was not necessarily my physical body. It was my, it was my focus.
Yeah.
So you'd have to, every length you went across, it's almost like you touch the tree at the end. You'd be like, okay, I have to you almost wanted to let go of your focus, but you're like, okay, I got to keep my focus. I got to keep my focus. And it was just a hard mental activity to do. It was really hard mentally, not even physically. So
another example, cold exposure. Mm-hmm. When me and Jeff went in the water, went in that cold ass river when I was like 2 degrees Celsius, that watching everyone else get into, basically you're in flow state. You have to have complete control and complete presence with your breath, with just all you care about is not freaking out. Mm-hmm. Being around other people that are doing that allows me to do that task to endure the cold for way longer than I would if I was just by myself. Mm-hmm. So I think, but anyway, in terms of group triggers, the big utility of that is in the form of, collaborative cooperation to a shared goal. So like a company, a business, if you engineer flow into your business, the productivity increases and the focus increases, which results in dollars and increased revenue, increased profits, can be insane. And so these group triggers, just to mention a few, are number one, shared goals, shared risk, a sense of control. So being able to control what you're doing and not being told what to do. Blending egos is another one they talk about. So instead of having individual egos, you blend it all together so that everyone is working on this kind of common ground. And open communication was another big one. And I think that shows up. That's a really obvious one. When everyone's communicating openly and honestly and everyone's on the same page, everyone feels comfortable. Open communication in a group setting almost helps to eliminate this hyper frontality. Right, this thought process of always thinking, oh, is that person approving what I'm doing? Am I doing something that I shouldn't be? Blah, blah, blah. If it's open communication, no one has the anxiety of whether they're stepping on someone else's toes or they're doing what they're supposed to. Everyone's just doing it, right? Mm-hmm. In the moment, doing it. It's a shared goal. This is where we want to get to. And in order to have shared goals, you also have to have good communication. So it really, as each of us being business owners, I think these, and people that just want to kind of seek optimal function, are always trying to seek optimal function, optimal performance, challenging ourselves. I really think that this whole concept of flow and how flow gets applied. So let's finish off by just talking about how we apply flow. But this is something that we're going to constantly continue to learn about. So that's why there will be future episodes on this, and hopefully we get better at structuring our thoughts and giving hopefully more tangible advice where people can actually use it. But let's talk about how you get into flow. Like, what are your favorite flow-inducing activities?
So I think we could talk about small doses of it versus large doses.
Yeah.
One of the larger dose things I like to do is go on, like I said, challenging hikes would be. Now, some of it is like, what can you do feasibly based on where you live and all of that?
Yep.
So like, I really like, if I took a step back, things like surfing, snowboarding, things that are like, full day or half day activities that I'm in it like for long periods of time, because it's like you're building on it and you can really get into that state. So really those like kind of action adventure sports would be it for me. Now on a micro level, I think that the combination of the beam and the slack line would be really like easy tools that I can, even the beam, like, or the beam you can do in your house, so you can do it like
You have
anywhere.
access to it anytime.
And then like a slackline is not that much harder barrier to entry wise too. You can go to a park or something and maybe a little bit more barrier to entry, but again, you get into that, it forces focus, and it trains me specifically to know what the feel is when I'm focused, which is very interesting. So when I go up to it, I'll be like talking with friends if we're doing a group session of the slackline, and then it's like when you go up to the slackline, you have to. It's hard to explain. You have to change your state and be like, okay, it's time now. It's time to do this because I can't be over there with the friends talking about them and making jokes anymore.
Yeah.
Time to do this now. Because if you're still kind of in that jokey state and you go up, you're gonna fall. So your performance is really what dictates your performance is your ability to focus.
Yeah.
So I will use the slackline or the beam to really get these small doses, and also combine it specifically with music. So I like really taking, because music alone can do it for me. So if I really hear like a song I like and I'm kind of blasting it, the combination of movement in some variety, whether it's balance or just general movement plus music, really does it for me. So I will, for some reason, when I'm on a beam or a slackline, if I can have that music there, it's like my body's kind of in that rhythm of the music as I'm going, and that is kind of like a double whammy for me. So
I agree. And so like the way you're talking about it is going on a slackline, actually, especially in a group setting where you're doing a session with people, it tunes your ability to control your mental state. Right, because every time I do a session with you, I see it. When you stand on a slackline, your breathing changes. Mm-hmm. You start to breathe with like this cadence that was not something that you were doing before, and essentially that's your way of funneling your attention to just breath and physical awareness.
And what's crazy about it, I don't know if people are if you're really focused on it, and my brother's like this too. If I'll even like say shit to him as he's on it, and he doesn't even know.
No response. He's in his own world.
You can't even hear people who are right beside you if you're in that state. So it's very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So that's kind of what it demands. It's like, how quickly can you get into the state where you're not even focused on any sound, nothing. There's no other things. You're focused on that. So I think that for me, it really is like small doses of training me to get into that. And then the challenge that I want to get better at is how can I like take that feeling and apply it to, can I take that feeling without the slackline and get into it? Is that possible? Is it possible with...
can you trigger that state without that stimulus?
Yeah, and I think it's like little doses. The more you do it, you can kind of like feel like, oh, that's the feel I need. Yeah. And it's this like, I like breathe out and I'm like, okay, here it is. And it's like, can I do that before I do a presentation? Can I do that? Can I get into that state before I do activity A, B, C? So I think if you can take the feeling of walking up to a slackline and knowing like, okay, I better get into the zone right now, and then applying it elsewhere is one of the goals that I'm going to be working on.
Yeah, and I heard some, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Joe Rogan, but someone talked about this, about flow state in the context of stand-up comedy, right? When you're doing some sort of performance, or it could be a musician, but I'm pretty sure I heard someone talk about it in the context of stand-up, and I've tried to apply the things that they talked about, where it's like, do you feel prepared? Do you feel competent? And if you know you've put in the preparation, right? Like that, I think I always get a little bit nervous before seminars because I just tell people, because I actually give a shit, and you put pressure on yourself, and I'm sure you're the same when you give a workshop. You put pressure on yourself because you care about what you deliver, right? But if you know you put in the preparation, you know the material, and you're there to help people, and these people are captivated, they paid to come listen to you, that is this kind of energy that allows you to deliver something that it's basically a performance, right? Mm-hmm. And even back to this whole music thing, you said that music helps you get into this kind of state because your body kind of tunes into the rhythm. This is why we put music in the seminars, right? This is why, like, I feel that during movement, I love, there are times where I just love nothing, right? So you can just tune into the movement you're doing. Like, for example, when I go for runs now, I don't listen to music because I like just tuning in and just thinking of my breath, thinking of my body. But there's other times, like when I do a beam session, 15 minutes, I have like a specific set of songs that I find just trigger my brain to just get deep into it. I don't know if it's like the BPM rhythm or whatever it is.
It's the beat of the music for me. It's the feel of the music. It's not necessarily like the words of the, like sometimes I like,
it's the feel of it.
Even like the beats of like gangster rap, and it's like, even regardless of what they're saying, is like that the beats for certain things. I agree. And you're like, oh shit, and then you just moving to it. Or sometimes it's more of like house music that so like you say, it's more like the feel, and that, like, I think it helps with that deep embodiment. You like feel the music, and it helps you get into
And I think
that.
part of it, yeah, so that's a big reason we put music in the seminars and in the movement and kind of hands-on portions. But I think another element of music is when there's a common song, like when everyone is listening to the same piece of music, everyone is kind of aligned. Like you get everyone aligning to this beat that's in the background. And I think this cohesiveness of like the shared experience is part of what gets people into the state of just, I don't know if people are always getting into flow during the seminar, but for some of the drills, like that foot tracing drill, you look at people and they're hyper focused on what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think the music allows them to just, tune into the moment, hear the same music everyone else is hearing, and not care as much about what other people are thinking, right? If you're completely tuned into what you're doing, you're probably realizing that people aren't looking at you, whether you think you look foolish or whether you think you look unskilled or whatever, because everyone's doing the same thing and they're focused on their own bodies. And I think that's a very powerful barrier to take down for people to just be able to explore movement without, overthinking of what they look like when they're doing it or what their squat looks like or how their balance is, because they're just they're zoned in.
Like that dance floor effect. Like if you're, I think that's fun. It's a funny part. Like you add
dance is another one.
You add alcohol to some people and alcohol plus music.
Yeah.
And you see that I think it just and I'm not saying drink alcohol, but for some people it just like opens them up to like being on a dance floor and just kind of like moving and stuff like that. Yeah. Whereas if you put the same people in, a lot of people become very self-conscious when they're in a situation where they're dancing, to dance,
they're moving,
but it also affects their ability to dance. It's like when somebody's really dancing well, they have to not be conscious of people watching them.
Yeah,
and I find that it's interesting that way. And it's like it's weird because if you put music on with yourself, like let's say you're in even like a basement, your basement, and you put music on, there's even a component of self-consciousness that comes into play until you realize like, wait a minute, no one's even watching me.
Yeah.
But it's like once you, even if you're alone, and then once you can get past that, then you can start to kind of flow. But you feel weird just doing it because I think that part of your brain is like looking at yourself. You're like, what are you doing right now? Yeah. And it's like you're looking silly or whatever.
Judgment brain.
Yeah.
It's always judging you for what you're doing. I think, what's that saying? Dance like no one's watching. That's like a very powerful metaphor to just let loose. Like, number one, people aren't judging you in the way that as much as you think they are. And even if they are, who gives a shit? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's one of those things where you have to, I always tell people like, cannabis makes people anxious, right? And it's like, all you're doing is tuning into the fact that you already care way too much about what people think about you. This is just exaggerating that feeling that you always have at a baseline, but it might be sub-threshold. And it's like using cannabis can sometimes be a way to train yourself to not give a shit about what people think about you. Because number one, you think they're talking about you or thinking or judging you way more than they are. And number two, you shouldn't care, because it's like, it's liberating and it gives you freedom to not have that conscious self-critic telling you that what you're doing is silly or what you're doing isn't right or whatever. And once you get rid of that and you can train that and basically force yourself to acknowledge that and know that it's a silly way of thinking, it's a very powerful tool to let you do things that you wouldn't otherwise, to let you go onto the dance floor and just set loose and have a great time without really caring that other people are judging you. And it's
funny because people often are judging you for not dancing as opposed to being the one that people are like, oh, look, he's not even partaking. So anyways.
Exactly. So hopefully that gives a good intro on flow state, allowing, I think the best way to get better at triggering flow state, number one, you got to know it's relevant. If people have a better life satisfaction and overall enjoyment by being in flow state more frequently, it's probably in your interest to learn about flow state. And I think the best way to allow yourself to enter that state more frequently is do your own experiments. Recognize what flow is, right? This sense of a loss of time, this hyper focus, this intrinsic enjoyment in the task you're doing. And create your own experiments to try and trigger flow. That could be balancing on a beam. It could be balancing on a slack line. It could be doing some sort of challenging activity that is a bit intimidating and feels a bit risky, but you can do it if you work towards it, and the consequences of failing are not dire, whether physically or whatever it is. And you just need to rediscover, you need to, number one, realize the importance of that state and prioritize trying to spend some time in it. And then number two is just get better and better at recognizing it and also getting better at triggering it. Right? Like you talked about, you're trying to figure out how to trigger the same feeling you get on a slack line when you're not on the slack line. And that comes by just doing that activity frequently and seeing, okay, what elements, were part of me getting into this state, and how can I mimic those in work or in writing or in whatever, or in giving a seminar or a workshop. So anyway,
and do shit that's enjoyable too, because like I think we're just all focused on productivity. Like you just need to do stuff that you actually find fun too, and it's like I feel good when I do that. So if it's weird that I think a lot of people feel like guilty with just doing things that they find like pleasurable, and so it's just important to just add these into your life, not only for the added benefit of them helping your productivity on the back end, but also just that it's fun shit. It's fun shit to do while you're doing it.
Because people feel bad doing things that aren't directly giving them productivity in their work life, but they don't realize that taking 25 minutes or half an hour out of doing something physically productive for work, doing something that's enjoyable and changes your state of mind, boosts your productivity when you come back and do the stuff that you need to do. Right? It's not actually a sacrifice to do something you enjoy. It's actually promoting productivity when you come back. It's just you have to be able to see the net positive instead of just seeing, I'm doing something that's not productive per se, but can actually be of a huge benefit beyond just that moment in time.
Exactly.
So anyway, hopefully that gives you a good overlay of flow. Stay tuned for another episode down the road when we continue to learn more about flow state, different ways we get into it. Anyway, we'll catch you next time.